Hello.
Hey.
It's Sunday again, but is it relevant? Maybe not. What's relevant is that we have a new episode of Biweeklycast, number 31, if I'm not mistaken. Hosts are still here. One of the hosts is me, Dima Malenko, and the other host is...
Slava, that would be me. And today we are going to talk about something that I can't really pronounce. But before that, there is a follow-up.
Okay, before we try to pronounce that German word, yeah, indeed, there is a bit of a follow-up. In the previous episode, we discussed some of the challenges you faced working in a co-creative space on an educational course. And I think there was a theme to that at least I did not spot at the moment when we were talking, but I think it is nonetheless important. There were several examples you've given when team came together to solve issues with the teamwork, right? They started doing shadow one-on-ones, and then there was this thing with a user guide on how to provide feedback for different participants. And I think this is often overlooked aspect of teamwork and relying on the team. And I try to remind myself that whenever there is a teamwork situation, or I'm working with someone and I see a problem, most of the time I should not try to solve that problem myself. Instead, I would want to involve the team in solving that, and that gives amazing results.
We need more managers like you, Dima.
Well, yeah. Yes, but I also sometimes get this in retrospect.
Welcome to the club.
Cool. So the topic and I'll do my best to pronounce this word. Probably I should have asked Vita to help me with this, but I think it reads as Zettelkasten method, and it is an approach to capturing and organizing notes that, if I understand correctly from my research, was pioneered by a German scholar, scientist, sociologist by the name of Niklas Luhmann. And his claim to fame is that over his lifetime and scientific career, he published over 70 books and over 400 scholarly articles on a variety of subjects. And his productivity in that regard is credited to his method of how he captured and connected notes and used that to generate new ideas and present them to people in compelling ways. So we're going to sort of talk about that a little bit.
And why exactly? Like, what's your motivation behind it? Like, why would you need this note-taking or maybe even note-thinking system?
Right, that's a great question, because indeed the Zettelkasten method is not the primary sort of topic for me. It's just one of the things that I came across and which looked compelling and interesting to me in my search for a better method of kind of organizing my own work. And the reason for that is that previously, and it quite a long recent time, I was working even at Rollup and stuff like that. I was operating in an environment where I worked on a relatively small number of projects, like maybe like a handful of projects, like up to 10, definitely. And that sort of allowed to allocate substantial amount of focus time to work on each of those projects, and the style of work was there that there were several threads, and each of those threads culminated in something being delivered, and it kind of made sense. I kind of liked working that way, and it was nice and good. And now I increasingly find myself in a situation where, and like, to take a step back, when working on those projects, I did quite a lot directly on them. It's not, I did it with other people, but my involvement there was fairly direct. And now I'm increasingly finding myself in a situation where I need to kind of contribute in a sort of meaningful way to way more projects or way more things that are going on. And what I'm trying to build for myself is an environment or a mode of operation where I would be only working directly on one or two things at a time. And for the rest of the stuff, I'll try to contribute as much as I can with kind of feedback, reviews, thoughts and ideas on where things might be going, but would rely on other people taking them forward if they see them as compelling. And trying to move there, I realized that my older methods of working on my ideas, where I would get an idea and then nourish it through kind of returning to it periodically, are no longer working. My value that I see for myself would be in having a bigger picture, understanding diverse problems, and kind of connecting the dots and showing those connections in a way that might be useful to others. Does it make it was windy and wordy? I'm not sure if it makes much sense.
I can try to get it back and let's see if I understood it correctly. So basically you're trying to resolve two main points here, that when you have to be not just focused on a singular project or a few projects, but on multiple things, you would like to get more organized in terms of two things. The way you take notes, like how you can manage your own base of knowledge, so to say, and the way you write. So when you try to convey an argument or put something in writing that could be reused later on by multiple teams on different occasions, you probably are looking for some kind of a writing system and thinking system.
Yes, I think that's fair.
Well, let's get into it, because I'm really excited about the things that you've shared, like the articles and the video and the Wikipedia article, I believe. That went fairly unexpected for me. Like, I just opened the links, and that's not something I really thought about before seeing the notes. Probably the closest I was getting here was through Focused Podcast when they were discussing Obsidian as a tool. And I think it's somehow related, not directly, but...
Yeah, I think Obsidian is quite often cited as a great tool to practice this Zettelkasten method, and kind of in general a great tool for note-taking and for developing and generating ideas and whatnot. I think our virtual friend CGP Grey uses Obsidian to do his research and writing these days.
Yeah, for his kind of job, that makes total sense. What's your status quo right now? Like, where are you with notes today?
Right. So I have several places where I take notes. Well, yes, I do have several places where I take notes. I think it's hard to argue with that. I would have my notebook where I take notes with pen and paper. Usually there, when I have an idea, I would try to first not forget it, and then when I have an opportunity, I would try to write it down, hopefully in several paragraphs of text, kind of to convey to myself, to my future self, a general gist of that idea, with hopes that I will pick it up and maybe develop into something bigger, or maybe use for something. That's one place. There is also a place, I guess, mostly on my phone when there are notes in the Apple Notes app, just things that I try to capture in the moment so that I do not forget them. Those usually would be one sentence or something like that. I had some experiments with making Siri capture notes for me when I'm running. We can talk about that separately, but there will be this set of kind of notes where I try to capture thoughts so that I do not forget them, because recently I also caught myself spending quite a lot of brain cycles in a mode where I thought like, yes, I had interesting idea and I could not remember what that was, and I sitting and kind of trying to put myself into this situation where I had this idea so that I could remember it. So I try to write more stuff down nowadays. And then there is a set of notes which could be seen as like drafts of articles or drafts of posts, drafts of something where I kind of work on some bigger ideas and try to get them polished in a way that can be published and then hopefully understood by other people.
Regarding this last point, and then the 2 points before about the short one sentence things, what kind of software is that? Is it like Apple Notes or something different?
The short ones to capture, not to forget, or something that's Apple Notes. Or I also do sometimes those thoughts come after something in audiobook or a podcast. I would get a screenshot and either write text directly on that screenshot, because there will be timestamp for the podcast. So if I wanted to get back to that, or I would send it to Apple Notes, and then it allows to have a screenshot and some text around it.
Well, in my case, I had a few approaches to that, and it's kind of a changeable system or situation. My job doesn't really require me doing that, but I really like the process of note-taking. Most tactical things get into this Sidekick notepad.
Nice.
So all the tactical things that come on a weekly basis, something I should think of like tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, just gets on this. Let me just show you. Basically, it's like 2 sections. Mm-hmm. It's a section for tasks and a section for creativity. And most of the ideas come to the creativity section, and the tasks come to the tasks and then migrate to the task lists. But I can't really tell you what happens with longer things, because when I have to create something or write something, it would be very different depending on what it is. It could be starting in ChatGPT, then moving to a website directly, or to the Google Doc or somewhere else. Like it depends on the workflow and what the text is about. I would use Evernote previously, but then I realized that I was getting fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer inputs there, and one day it just died. So most of the things migrated elsewhere. And probably the last thing that happens is when I'm preparing for some kind of a book club, like our book clubs or something apart, and I'm using a digital book for that. I use Apple Notes as a place to drop the quotes and the structure and some kind of things. The rest of my writing goes into Notion. So when I'm working on some kind of hypothesis, idea, right now Notion is probably my most typed application.
Oh, that's interesting. I forgot to mention one more thing that I have, especially for work-related stuff. I use this software called Logsec. So a little bit of a weird name. It's an outliner app, but it also has some similarities to Obsidian, but that's besides the point. One of the things that it has, it allows to create journals. But what I mean by with any software you can create journal, right, for every day that passes by. The thing that Logseq does is just automatically generates a node for each date as it comes. So there is naturally a place to capture something, and I use that to capture what happens during that day. And if I come across a document or something like that I interact with, I would try my best to log it there so that I have a chance to find it, hopefully, if I need, or find it easier rather than just doing a full sweep search through whatever.
I don't know. It sounds to me as if we could split this conversation into two parts, right. Like organizing thoughts and ideas and writing, because it seems as if we are using different kind of things and approaches and ways.
Right. And this is actually interesting because there is with this Zettelkasten method I already described how Niklas Luhmann, he was 20th century scholar, right? He pioneered that, and Zettelkasten in English it means sliding box, like those cabinets with a whole bunch of boxes there which you can slide out and slide in, and you can put index cards or something along those lines there. So he literally used this device to manage and capture his notes. How this thing became popular, I think it was because of the book called How to Take Smart Notes, published in 2017, which kind of popularized or brought wider attention to this whole idea of Zettelkasten, and people started using it and adopting and changing it for the digital times. And I guess where I wanted to take this was that I just get this book a couple of hours ago. There was a bit of a logistical mishap. I hope to get it earlier, but it happens as it happens. And I started reading the book. Here's the book, How to Take Smart Notes by Sonke Arens. I think that's Dutch scholar or teacher or professor. I'm not really sure. Apologies for that. And I started reading it on the tube, and one of the things that he conveys there is that writing and taking notes are often separated, but they shouldn't be. Because when you sit out to write something, if you have a baggage of notes and ideas that you captured and hopefully developed over time, because the Zettelkasten method also prompts you not to capture ideas from what you are reading or watching or whatever, but also to generate your own notes and ideas and so on and capture them. And they argue that having that, it makes it easier for someone to start writing and to finish writing and to produce something that would be of value to the readers, which should not preclude us from trying to attack those two things separately. Just saying.
Well, if you're a believer and you would like to make them work together, we could discuss that. I'm just curious how, after your research, you think it works. Like, let's say I'm a manager and I have to manage a few teams and I think about a few projects, and then there are some philosophical and ethical thoughts that just come to my mind. Mm-hmm. There are some managerial thoughts that come to my mind, not specifically linked or related somewhere. So the way I understood it, that I basically create a number of tags that I label those cards with. And then there is this compass thing, like the directions. This is where they kind of lost me, because that was a very tricky system. And I tried to put it like on the notes that I take, and it's kind of a really big extra effort. And I can see the value out of so many additional things. Like, I basically write a sentence and I have to tag it, then I have to submit it somehow, link it to something. it's getting really difficult.
I agree with you. And in different videos and in different sources they put their own flavor onto things and say, oh, you need to do like I do it this way, and this is the best way. So therefore, you should do the same, and so on and so forth. I'm with you on that. However, I think that there is merit to this whole thing. I think the key ideas, the way I understood them from my research, and I'm yet to read this book, as I just described, is that the key ideas would be that first, when you're taking notes, you want those notes to be atomic in a sense that they would represent a single idea, which I think to me is different. For me, a note would be a note, like a written text that kind of stands on its own a little bit. And here in this method, they claim that no, like you want one note to represent one idea, and then have that idea to be linked with other with other ideas, and this is how something that's bigger is built. And yes, different software and different people would use different notations to then link those ideas, or to structure them, categorize, and so on and so forth. But I think I started with I tried to distance myself from that for now, because I thought like, no, I need to figure out what would work for me. But I like this idea of having one note per something. For example, an example of that would be, I've heard about an experiment with using AI to determine if something contains harmful content or something along those lines. I heard it in the podcast, but I thought that this is an interesting idea, and I'd like to try how it works. I captured this as a sort of atomic note, and there I put it as, yeah, this is the idea, and this is where I heard about it.
Can we just try simplifying it? Because let's say we've read the book No Rules Rule.
Yes.
By the way, this was episode 28, where we discussed it. Out of this episode, I come out with 5 thoughts on what I would like to try, think about, or like basically it's a complex idea that could be potentially separated into 5 atomic notes, because they're like the elements of this big idea that I was thinking about. Firstly, it kind of takes skill to decompose the complex thought process or chain and see the correlations and causations and all the other aspects, how these thoughts were appearing. And then just the method of putting them into the system kind of seems not natural, like, because what I would do, I would just see which of those are tasks, which of those are thoughts that require extra consideration, and I would just get them into my task manager as either tasks or ideas, and they would just go to split categories, and that's it. How would it work?
I don't know how it would work here. My best idea here would be that, from what I understand and from what I've learned and from what seems to make sense to me, this method only covers the information itself and its structure and how you represent it. It does not cover kind of processes around that. So if you would want to create a task for yourself to think through an idea, I think that would be outside or orthogonal to this method. The way I would imagine it working is there's one more element to this Zettelkasten method, is that in this method they divide the notes you take into by and large three categories. I will start with the second. The way it is listed in our notes, the literature notes would be the ideas you get from other sources. Or originally, I guess that would be ideas you get from other books or other papers, where you would capture this idea, maybe a little bit of a context around that idea, and have a source for that idea. That would be the literature note, like something that you took from a book or from a podcast or from something like that. And that would be the thing that will live there. And you can imagine that over time you can come across this similar idea in different sources. Maybe they have different examples to illustrate that idea, and you can get those two notes and kind of connect them as being related to one idea. So that those are literature notes that have references to sources. Then they have things that they call fleeting notes. Those are notes for similar to what I use Apple Notes for, to capture things, not to forget about them. But those fleeting notes are meant to be worked on later. I guess the expectation would be that either you put something in your task manager or allocate your time to yourself time to process those fleeting notes, to maybe turn them into, I don't know, like literature notes, but more commonly into notes that they call permanent notes, which represent more or less developed ideas that you want to keep. Because sometimes when you capture a fleeting thought, it may be interesting, it may seem interesting in the moment, but then when you think about it, it's like, it's not entirely interesting, we can forget about this. But those ideas that are still interesting after consideration, you turn them into permanent notes and start connecting them with one another.
Just to check my understanding, literature notes is something you use mostly for researching because it's related to external sources. The fleeting notes is basically something temporary that you should either consider and then decide whether it goes into this into the permanent ones, which basically useful stuff, and you say like, this is good stuff and it deserves to be in my base of notes.
Yep. I think that's it. And then does it make sense thus far? I'm not sure if it makes sense, because I'm maybe a little bit ahead of you in exploring this, because I started earlier, but I by no means an expert or even kind of proficient understander of this whole thing.
I'm just trying to think, like, where would you apply it? Like, let's say you are a team lead in a software company. You tend to think about multiple ideas during the day.
Right.
You capture those, and then right now it sounds really heavy in terms of administrative things, like the way you have to input, tag, connect, and do quite a lot of work, not really knowing what this work is done for.
I would agree with that, I guess. And to me, this whole thing is in a sense similar to how something like getting things done is supposed to operate, right? You capture the tasks in the inbox, but then the method says that you need to allow yourself time to process that stuff. And I think I tend to think about this processing of fleeting nodes as a similar thing. So the fleeting nodes are sort of inbox, and then with time, each week, each day, however one sets themselves up for that, you process that and either discard them or turn them into permanent nodes. And also,
I think basically Sidekick Notepad is the fleeting node. It's something that I just keep on the table while it's there, and then when the week is over, I review it, and then things that are useful, they go to Notion. So basically Notion is my storage of permanent notes. I just don't have the literature notes apart from some learning experiences when I'm taking a course or researching a topic. That's interesting.
I think what I find interesting and useful about ideas, about literature notes, is that very recently, in that example of kind of podcast where they used AI for something interesting, I made a note about this idea. Oh, this that sounds interesting. That people tried that and so on and so forth. And then in a couple of weeks, I came across a situation where it would be useful for me to share that with someone else. And then I found myself in a situation where just saying, oh, I've on one podcast, I've heard that they said about other people doing X, which very quickly became like second, third, fourth, fifth hand sort of knowledge. And I thought, oh, it would be more useful if I could share, oh, I've heard it here. This was the idea. I heard it here. It might be interesting to you, and not having a direct and readily available link to that podcast was slowed me down, because I had to find that podcast. And as you can imagine, it's not always easy to search or Google for podcasts having discussed a particular idea or something along those lines.
I could imagine a thinker working with 100 sources,
Mm-hmm.
or a researcher working with multiple sources having this issue. But let's just be realistic. You basically go through dozens of sources a week,
Yes.
minimum. Articles, podcasts, some of them are on the run. Some of them are during walking the dog. Some of them
Yes.
are on the tube.
Sure.
Like you face a lot of information in different spots. And you have no idea what is the percentage of useful stuff there. Like you can't, for example, catalog all the content that you digest, because it goes like through reels on Instagram and
Sure.
some other formats that are very fast flowing,
Mm-hmm.
and they go in small chunks.
Mm-hmm.
How is it even possible to capture all of this flow of information and moreover split it into separate literature notes? Because during the podcast they would mention a book, they would mention something else, there would be a number of ideas, and I believe you wouldn't just create a single literature note about an episode that you've just listened, because it has to be separate things and separate thoughts.
Well, I think my take on this is following. I think, projecting this onto myself, I think over the course of a regular day, I would maybe have only a handful of occasions where I would want to capture something like this. Yes, in one, with some particularly lucky podcast episode, it can generate a spur of ideas, but that's it. Like there may be 5, 6, 7 things in a day that I want to capture.
The issue here is that in your example, where you come to a conversation and then you remember the podcast or something as a source of something that inspired you, this idea comes to you during the meeting. It didn't come to you while you were listening to a podcast, because you didn't know where you would need it later on.
No, well, I think maybe I didn't make myself clear or describe the situation more clearly. I think at the time I was listening to that podcast, I made a mental note for myself. Oh, like this is an interesting thing. It might be useful. And
this is fair.
And I didn't capture. But otherwise, of course, I agree with you that if it's if it's too late, in retrospect, you figure, oh, it would have been useful for me to have captured this. Yes, but you can only capture as much, I guess.
I mean, it's like a real. It sounds like burden. Like after listening to an episode of, let's say, People First podcast, I would just sit and think like, where could it potentially be useful? And what are the hashtags that should go on this card?
I agree with you. The way I think I would do that, I think I envision for myself having 2 categories of things. If in general an episode of podcast was interesting and sort of compelling, I start them in Overcast, but I think I would now also try to create a note on about like there was this episode and maybe the topics or things that captured my thinking. If I have very specific ideas about that, I will maybe capture this. There was this interesting episode, and this was the idea from that episode. But of course, if it was just a thing, it was okay, interesting podcast to listen, but nothing really to take away. I will just let it slide. Something.
Do you consider testing some kind of software system for that?
I'm trying to use Obsidian for that. Just no good reason for well, there is half good reason. There is. I remember I mentioned that I use the software called Logseq, which many people say this is a competitor to Obsidian in the way how it works and like in the capabilities of using it for personal knowledge management. The key differences, I guess, at least from what I can see now for myself, would be that Logseq is outliner. So everything, you cannot write a text. Well, you can, but that text would be and kind of a list item thing, which you can then turn into hierarchical list of items. Whereas Obsidian allows you to write plain text. Of course, you can use list items there and nested list and so on and so forth to turn it into outliner. But this is the biggest difference for the two for me. And never in a million years it would occur to me to write an article or a post or something along those lines in Logseq, just because I cannot. I do not really think in terms of writing in Outliner. Outliner for me is for capturing notes, not for writing. And Obsidian is interesting in that it because it's just a text thing, it does allow for writing. But what I'm actually trying to do is to be a little bit more diligent and systematic about capturing notes and then transferring them into some centralized storage.
You made me think about it, and I'm right now still not buying the idea of connecting the knowledge base and the writing tool. They seem separate to me, even though they could potentially be in the same place. Like I potentially can imagine Evernote or eventually Obsidian being a thing, but and there are also sharing options, right? You can share some Obsidian cards with people, and
I think so, but I'm so not sure about how it works. I think yes, you can kind of create. I think Obsidian has this term called vault, which is a collection of nodes, and like you can have several vaults, and they are independent from one another. And there are ways to make those vaults public in one way or the other. And also sometimes people say that Notion is also in the same category as those two. It just has different capabilities on top of that. It is meant for collaborative work from the get-go as opposed to Obsidian and Logseq, and has a lot of...
With Notion, it seems harder in terms of navigation because Obsidian is designed or created, the way I understand it, to create all these tags and relations and categories and stuff. And Notion is not really good there. Like probably you have to be really aware of the system and the architecture before you start. While in Obsidian, you can figure things out and like assemble the train in the process of writing.
It makes sense.
I think one of the reasons why I kind of struggle imagining it is because fleeting notes, all right, I could imagine that I could potentially bring it into the digital software thing. Researching is a bit different because I research lots of things like work-related, personal-related, just podcast-related things. And I use different spaces for that, like my personal Notion, work Notion, our biweekly Notion. And for example, while preparing for today's episode, I watched some videos and there were some really interesting ideas to consider. But they're already here. Like, here they are. I just opened the notes of your episode. The links are there. I can always get back to it. I just think, what would be the benefit of cataloging things that are already prepared by you or somehow outlined? Chances are I will remember where I faced it or where exactly I was working with it. I can imagine why people like CGP Grey, who write a lot and do deep research and have to connect a number of sources or play with different types of content, like from the podcast, from the tweets, from Instagram, from the library, an actual paperback book, quoted or just photographed. But it's kind of hard to fit into the manager's perspective, like something that would be more not on the study side. Yeah.
I can see the challenge there, and interestingly enough, many of the videos and articles and stuff like that talking about this method, including the book itself, it says one simple technique to boost writing, learning, and thinking. And I try to put emphasis on writing and learning. A lot of the materials available around the internet, they are focused on those kind of things, as if like you are a student and you need to learn quite a lot and kind of digest a lot of information and so on and so forth, and then use that information to write articles or whatever it is that you do as a student, especially as a PhD student. And the method itself, given that the originator of the method was scholar himself, it kind of lends naturally to that type of activity. And maybe it may be less obvious or less useful for some other lines of work. The reason why I think it resonated with me is that I feel like my work, or at least part of the value that I can bring, could be in that scholarly kind of type of a thing where I learn from different people what they're working on, what are their ideas or challenges in their space, and then be connecting and synthesizing something out of that. So that would be one element here. And I think another element which is difficult, which I don't think I fully internalize, and I also think is difficult to convey, is the idea that once you take those notes, the moment you work on them and you turn those fleeting notes into permanent notes, would be the time where you generate new ideas based on the knowledge that you've accumulated, and then you can take those ideas further and do something with them, which I think can be applicable to managerial or kind of different lines of work as well. Like, given our previous discussion about your work on a course, you might have captured, we had this challenge, and maybe pose it as a question, and then another challenge or another thing that worked fine, and maybe then leverage that and turn it into a method of co-creation for something and leverage it that way.
You see, I can see it maybe just halfway. Let's say an idea comes to my mind while working on something. I create this fleeting note, let's say on paper when it comes. Then I probably create a card in my task manager to just consider it, not to forget it. or I put it into the meeting notes, like for the next meeting to discuss with the team. I find it really hard imagining how I would transfer it into the permanent note afterwards. Let's say, like when this idea is discussed or researched or thought through, the cataloging system seems artificial to me. Like it's really energy and time consuming, especially if it's not leading me anywhere. Like if I'm not going to act on it more. Let's imagine that our educational course is never happening again. And we will be running a retrospective at the end. I will have the document with the retrospective, with all the conclusions and lessons learned and stuff. And according to this method, I believe I should split it into separate, like, lessons learned, tag them, connect them somehow, and put them into the system afterwards, like, because they were processed and they are potentially useful elsewhere. But then it's kind of hard to imagine when exactly am I going to come back to this specific card and what would be the method. I can imagine how I remember the retrospect notes. Like I just find the Google Doc or Notion page with a retrospective of a specific project and look through the lessons learned there. But when they're like, in this archive or knowledge base, it doesn't sound navigatable to me. Maybe I just haven't seen such systems in real. That's why it's hard.
I think I can see that the challenge there, right? Not everything that we treat as a node maybe has a place as a node in a system like this. Maybe if this is only a temporary thing, you would capture this as a fleeting node, and then once it used, it is then gets discarded, and you do not turn it into permanent node. That would be one idea I would have. I have zero knowledge or almost zero experience to report on that. And then there was one other thing I wanted to add there is in at least some of the videos and some of the resources that I've read, they also discussed the idea of searchability for the nodes, kind of acknowledging the challenge that you just presented. If you have, let's say you have 10 nodes, you can easily navigate through them. You can examine them one by one and find the one that you're interested in. But then if you have 10,000, might be an exaggeration, but then even 100 or 1,000 of such nodes can be a nightmare to navigate to. And I don't know. I guess with digital tools, at least we would have search, and if you are smart enough or diligent enough to put some of the keywords, it might help you find those nodes later on. But people do suggest some strategies how to write nodes such that you can find them, and this also suggests that it's not an easy problem.
For me, it's tricky because it kind of combines a lot of spheres of my life. And I could imagine that I am researching a topic for debates, an Aspen philosophical text, and then something else. There's a huge variety of things that I go through on a weekly basis. And some of the ideas seem promising and interesting, and they're worth considering. But then getting through all of this stuff seems difficult. I can only imagine when it's something more focused, like writing. Like, let's say you would like to write a longer article about something. Then I can see how, like, you draft some aspects that you would like to think about. You probably make a research, basically like an episode of a podcast. You think of a big idea, you think of the aspects, then you go through the materials. You keep the interesting materials as links in our Notion. And then basically based on this plan, we go and record the episode. I think an article is quite similar here. You get like the problem you'd like to solve, you run the research, and you keep the interesting notes and messages and ideas, and then you actually start putting it together into writing.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think the way how I imagine this would work is you're right that when you have a specific goal to do something, record an episode of podcast or write an article or a book or whatever it is about someone, record a video about something, then that would be similar to my kind of earlier mode of operation. You have a thread that must culminate in something, and you just do the best thing that can get you there faster and with required level of quality, and kind of that makes sense this way. Interestingly enough, some of the people who shared videos on YouTube about how they use this Zettelkasten method were describing their process for working on those videos or kind of communicating with their audience on social network, where I think that the mode of operation is somewhat different. You do not necessarily have a specific point you are getting to, but rather, oh, it's Monday, I need to share an interesting idea with my audience. What could that be? And like, you examine through notes. Oh, this sounds like something I haven't published, and this is somewhat compelling idea. Let me publish that. And then having notes with all of those ideas kind of helps, right? It's like with me having thousands of photographs on my hard drive. If you ask me to publish a photo, like a decent photo at any moment in time, I would be able to find something for that. But that would not necessarily help me to produce an exhibition or something like that, or a project or a series of photographs for a specific topic or something like that. So there is indeed disconnect between the two. But what I would also add on top of that is that once you keep those notes, this can also inform the choice of projects or specific goals to go after and do them in a more linear fashion, kind of cultivate a number of ideas and then find something interesting and compelling enough, worthy of doubling down on it to turn it into article. No, I'm not. I have not convinced you. I can see by your looks.
We can elaborate more on the example you provided about the photos.
Right.
Basically, it's your personal knowledge or database
Yes.
that you have. I think that today, if I ask you, like, can you give me some decent pictures of nature, or I'd like to print out some urban poster with your photograph, you probably remember what are the photo sets and albums to go to, even if you have a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And the process of cataloging everything, like every time you come back, like from, I don't know, Sunday protest in London, put in all these hashtags and titles and names and things would require so much time and effort.
Right, but that would be paying it forward, and I would have to disagree with your statement that it is easy to find a photo. With me, my photo archive spanning years and years now, even if I remember and visually remember the photo I would want to find, it might not be an easy process. I'm not at all diligent with hashtags and stuff like that. And I think now at least AI might be of help a little bit, where you can say, like, find my photos with trees and stuff like that. It would be maybe able to help you that way. But other than that, it might be very tricky to locate a specific photo. Because and that stems from the approach at least I used to catalog photos, which initially it seemed like not a bad of an idea to store them by years and months and dates, so that all photos taken on the same day will be in the same folder because I thought that the dates would be a relatively easy way to navigate and find stuff. And then there will be a little bit of a tagging and keywording sprinkled on top of that. But that doesn't really work if you need to fish out for a specific thing which you don't know. Yeah, I guess it was in 2022. Like when or where, it might be very tricky to locate.
Fair enough. Well, the way I see it right now, it's either hugely personal, like you don't really interact with anyone else within this database, because if you use it as a system of your personal knowledge management, then both your work-related insights, personal-related insights, something else gets in there because it's the system. Or if it's professional, I could see how it works for people who work with generating content. Like that's definitely a job that would require this sort of system. Writing as the core activity, and researching. Like these three things are probably maybe some kind of analysis that I haven't thought of. Like it's hard for me to imagine like an average team leader or manager using this system on day-to-day basis.
I may throw a pun here. Like, of course, like if you are talking about average team leader, yeah, they may not need something like that. If we are talking about the crop of the cream team leaders, they might benefit from something like this. But I can see that it can be an overkill depending on A, what someone does, and B, what other processes or habits or procedures and tools that are available to them.
I can just say that I'm really curious what you're going to figure out in the process of trying. I would definitely look into how it helps you achieve your goal, especially if it's the crop of the
best
creams.
Crop of the
creams of the crop, whatever
that was, right?
Above average usage. And I'm really curious into the balance of the benefits that you get and the trade-off that you have to make with all the time and organization and efforts put into the system, like whether it actually pays back. I can definitely see the potential in your case, especially given the context. Yeah, I can't imagine it working for me right now. Apart from very specific, like narrow cases, like writing an article or working on another course or project that would require this kind of knowledge management.
I agree with you. And to me, this is also of a great concern, this whole idea. I'm going to give it a fair try, but the requirements and the rituals that are required for this method to sort of work are also a concern to me. I'm not the most disciplined person in that regard, so that's why I periodically have to reset my kind of to-dos and task management, is because like I start and I keep up and prune and clean up my list, but then something happens and I stop doing that as diligently until it becomes a truckload of garbage, and then it's easier just to declare bankruptcy on that one and start afresh. Which is not a bad thing. I guess that's maybe how I operate, but I sense similar dynamics here. Let's see how it works. I think the way how I try to talk myself into that would be that it would require me to slow down a little bit. Hopefully, maybe, sort of. Yeah, I know.
Let's give it a try.
I see you. I can hear skepticism in your voice, but yeah, I'll be trying this, and I guess I could report on how it goes, maybe in a month or so.
The aspect that I find specifically interesting is whether it's going to work out of your workplace, like on the runs and somewhere else. Because I just came back from Aspen, where I spent a week with just a laptop with limited time for organizing things, and my inbox just exploded. Like when I am at home or in the office or somewhere where I have two screens, a usual setup, things that come in are processed way easier. Just when I was on the rides and then living in the hotel and all these like incoming messages that were coming through the phone, not through the laptop, that was a disaster. And I usually postpone things until I come back to my usual workplace to process them.
I hear you so much, and it's same here. Like in the work setting, I always have my laptop with me, and I take notes right there in my log sack in the journal kind of thing, and I can then grab notes out of there and turn them into something useful and task, like whatever it is. But the offline world, it is a whole another beast. I tried, as I said, to employ Siri to capture the notes, like let's say when I'm running, but that's the only thing that the only purpose they serve is that hopefully they would capture some of the keywords which would help me to restore the context and what I was thinking about that, because either my English when I'm running is so spectacularly bad, or is it series transcribing it is spectacularly bad, but I can hardly read the notes Siri created for me. It's like one of the notes reads Lena Conan. I know that's Lena Khan, which is FTC commissioner in the US, navigating the medical bill issues. Is it kind of the situation where there is kind of qualified laws and rules and how insurance payments work, which were not precisely executable, and some parts profit of that, and now with AI we are able to execute those rules more precisely. I can make sense of that because it contains several keywords like Lena Khan's name, which is grossly misspelled here, but yeah, I don't have a solution for that. I don't know what to do with this.
There's a cool thing that my friend gave it to me. It's a Rocket book. Basically, it's a book which you can scan at certain points. And this thing helped me a lot during my previous business trip, because you can set up your phone as the scanner. Mm-hmm. And it would send the picture with your note to a specific place, to an inbox of an email, or save it on Google Drive to a specific folder. And then when you come back, you can just get through them and catalog them thoroughly. This is the closest I could get, but I used it only like twice during the business trips, and I struggle using it on, I don't know, offline meetings or somewhere else where I probably should try.
Good idea. And I also heard or seen people using iPads for a similar purpose, with like modern iPads with Apple Pencils are great for kind of writing with them, and they also reportedly good with transcribing writing into kind of digital text, or however we call it. So it might work for some people as well.
You know, it's like the 10th year we've been discussing this topic about the note taking that we should eventually get there. And here I am.
Nothing beats pen and paper. I agree with you. Except when you need to find or search through those older notes, I guess.
That is true. Well, fingers crossed. And I really wish you good luck there, because if you succeed, I'll be so happy to be proven wrong and to use some of the experience that you get in the process, because you're basically trying to bring some order into a very chaotic process and organize different spheres by a single system, which definitely deserves a try. So my best regards.
Right. Thanks. And I think I also should mention that I'm not trying to organize like everything under the sun, but like the work related stuff and the kind of work related thinking, most of
which
all,
is easily like 70% of input that you get.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Well, I really wish that it brings you more benefit than, I'm sorry, only not very tolerant words. struggles.
Right. Yeah, we'll see how disciplined I'm going to be to fully try this method, or at least ideas from this method. You may know that I'm not good at buying methods and stuff and instruction wholesale, but I do pick some of the ideas and try to run with them.
Well, as my partner Alexei likes to say, give it a try and see what happens.
I will in a week or two.
Hopefully good ones.
Yeah, in a good week.